Here we are again, showing the work to date on the Seaforth kilt. Now, if you remember right at the beginning, I had to sort of come up with my own method for creating boxed pleats because my old master never taught me. And that I had done an initial fold and baste and press of the, looking at from here, the right-hand pleat, the right-hand crease of each pleat. And then having sewn the kilt up, I would then baste down the left-hand crease of each plate. And that's if somebody out there has got the better method or knows the original method, please share it with us. At the same time, I'm a bit happy with the method that I've created. It's a massive ton of work, but it creates what I think it does the job very well. So extra amount of work there again, basting everything in place, and then 2 presses, and then also the first pleat and the last pleat are knife pleats facing inward rather than box pleats. And again, the reason for that is I've seen on old kilts or kilts where all of the pleats, including first and last, are box pleats. These end pleats tend to spill and lose their box press, and it's to do with something I can't quite figure out, but it's to do possibly with the movement of the aprons and the apron pleats. So I don't think I'm the first one to do that, because I believe I've seen kilts which have been made that way. So there we go. So now, as I said, I was doing my best to pay honor and homage to the old methods of the pre-war and post-war kilts up until the 50s or so, 50s or 60s. But I've done some what I consider improvements, and I will defend these improvements. And one of them is the strap on the inside apron in the original kilts would be sewn underneath and then covered with the sewing would be covered by the lining. I sew it on the outside. I prefer it that way. And for as much as anything else, it means that if you have a bit of a change in your waist measurement, because, for example, as I've said elsewhere, if you put the kilt on and the buttonhole bottoms out against the stitching, you've lost a little bit of weight, and you can't. Therefore, the kilt can't, if it bottoms out like that, the kilt simply isn't tight enough. So by having it on the outside, we can move it left or right. So we can gain or subtract 1.5 inches, 2 inches even, of the change in the waist measurement. So that, I believe, is superior, and I'm going to stick with that. Now, the customer gave me carte blanche as far as choosing the style of buckle. Now, I have quite a few of these antique buckles that were used from, I believe, the earliest years. I believe around the 1860s, because I've seen some very early kilts with these. You never know if they've been retrofitted, though. The 2 tongue buckles, and in this case I've used, because I have quite a few originals, because when I was refurbishing the Canadian Seaforth kilts for the Trooping the Color in 2010, I refurbished over 200 kilts, and we made the decision to go to the more modern single tongue buckle because they were plentiful and the straps were plentiful, and away we went. But I kept the old buckles, and I like them for a number of reasons. And they're a nice retro look, and I chose to go with a couple of originals because, again, the client and I are both old soldiers, and we kind of like the way, we feel a bit of nostalgia about the way things were. Now, the lacquer, the so-called Japan finish, is a little bit scratched, but whatever, time served, because these are almost certainly from the 1947 issue of kilts that came to the Canadians after the 2nd Battalion Seaforth was disbanded in that year. So, and the other thing too, the original tab originally would have been made out of black oilcloth, which was fine. They had plenty of it, but it's not terrifically durable. It doesn't age well. So what I've done is my method of making a tab out of the tartan, and it's quite durable, and it's also, as you can see, it's sewn as a unit. So when we sew, I haven't sewn this one on yet, but when we sew this buckle on, now again, I'm sewing through and through. I sew through the buckle, through the kilt, through the canvas, and out again as secure as possible. But again, with that little bit of if a little bit of tailoring is required, because after all, we are literally on opposite ends of the planet. He's in Scotland, I'm here in Vancouver. That if, for example, this buckle needs to be moved back a bit, you can carefully sever the stitching, and the tab won't fly apart, because as we've seen, I've commented elsewhere and seen elsewhere, oftentimes clever tailors will do sort of an origami thing with these things, and it's a beautiful bit of work, but its integrity depends on it being sewn on the garment. You cut it off and it flies apart, which is really annoying. So I'm going to sew this in place, but should it need moving in the future, you can take it to someone local who's good with the needle and thread and move it a wee bit. Now moving to the underside, or one more thing. Again, customer chose the tartan top band, which looks rather well, I think. Now we're moving to the inside, and now I'm going to compare, starting with the top band, I'm going to compare my methods, which I consider, I'm going to say it, superior to what had been done in the past. And here we have a top portion of a kilt, again from the 1947 issue, which I'd altered for a soldier. And I'm going to come back to the reason for why I'd shortened it like this in just a minute. It's actually very well made in that the apron pleats are quite generous by Army standards, because quite often I will see an inner apron that has no apron pleat at all, that the apron just runs off from the last pleat, which I think is bad practice, because therefore the kilt won't hang and drape as well. But somebody who's trying to save some money, it's a nasty little trick. But these ones actually have quite generous apron pleats, which I'm impressed by. The tartan, or the green woolen top band I've spoken about elsewhere. But the canvas, as you can see, the canvas was attached, sewn through and through to the buckle, because this is what some modern kilt makers have called, they call it hold and fold, where there's no buckle and strap on the left hip. You brought in the inner apron, you sucked it as hard as you could, you brought across the outer apron almost like a cummerbund and buckled it. So all of the tension was on the outside apron, which caused, and you can actually see it, you can see how the lines have sort of an open S shape because the cloth has been under tension. It was a single piece of canvas as a belt from strap to buckle, which is good. But as you can see, the basting is what I would call suboptimal, right? And to be fair to them, they had a great deal they had many kilts to make, 2 up to strength battalions in the Seaforth alone. So they couldn't lag about, but I don't consider this best practice. I also don't know how long this kilt was expected to last before the soldier was eligible for replacement. So if this was a 5-year item or a 2-year item, this is good enough, right? But good enough isn't good enough, so I don't do it that way. So what I have done again is I've gone with it's not patent, but I call it my patent canvassing, in which the canvas is one piece from the buckle to the strap, but it's 5 inches wide and it's integral. These are folds. These aren't cuts. We see that elsewhere where they cut it to get the radius. These are folded and quilted down with herringbone stitch, quilted herringbone stitch at this end as well. So it's spreading the tension across a broader footprint. If you think in sort of builder's terms, the foundation is broader. And I believe that the client, when he puts this on, he's going to find this exponentially more comfortable than the last Army kilt that he wore. I'd asked him about putting in the elastics, which are a common feature of Seaforth's kilts. I didn't wait for his reply. I just went ahead and did it. And if he wants them gone, I'll take them out again. And as I've mentioned elsewhere, I thought when I first encountered elastics in kilts when I was a recruit in 1974, I thought this was a new thing, right? But when I was curator of the Regimental Museum, I found a copy of Part 1 orders issued by Fort George, Regimental Headquarters, Seaforth Highlanders, British Army, in 1908. And in one of the annexes at the back, there was a price list for the regimental tailoring shop, because in those days, quartermaster stores had a regimental master tailor and as many soldier apprentices as he was prepared to handle, enough to do the work. And there's this price list to regulate pricing so somebody isn't getting gouged, right? And it established the price. In one line, there's the price for elastic sewn into the kilt. That's in 1908. And I'll talk about why that Part 1 orders was sent over in another history video, if I haven't mentioned it already. But there it is. And they're doing it as early as 1908. And therefore, I believe that the moment that garment elastic like this is 1 inch wide or 7/8 inch wide elastic strips became available to dressmakers and tailors and clothiers and such like that, some soldier went, that's the stuff for me, and sewed it in this kilt and presented a neat appearance. Because the problem is, nobody else, you won't find any civilian kilt with this level of detail. This is 39 pleats. And the box pleat can be very, very problematic to keep looking neat. So hence the elastics. And as I say in an earlier video, originally it was one elastic across the bottom. It was black. It was sewn on with black thread. And invariably, the person that sewed it on so that it would never, ever, ever let go. And that creates two problems. One of them, that is elastic, whether it's synthetic or natural, the elastic eventually perishes. And that has to come out. But they've sewn it, so we got to remove it. But I've spent so many hours, so many anxious hours with my nose practically up to the cloth, because some knothead has done such a good job of securing it, that I'm in there. It's almost like exploratory surgery. I'm desperate to not damage the cloth, but they've made it difficult to do so. So enough of that. I use an elastic of a different color, a contrasting color to the tartan, and I sew it on, almost tack it on with a contrasting thread to that color. And they're not terrifically strong, right? That's the whole point of the thing, is that we hope that they'll last until the elastic perishes. But the point of this is that forever, for whatever reason, if this gets snagged or a pleat gets pulled, we want this stitch to fail before it destroys the cloth. So there we are. So you can, and also because of contrasting color, you can tell at a glance, oh, this one's letting go, and it's just a little bit of minutes work with a needle and thread and just to do it up again. So from here, I am going to put the lining in, and then I'm gonna pull this several dozen meter, I don't know, I'm not the sort to quantify things and make tables and graphs and stuff like that, but there's many yards of basting thread in this, which will be recycled. We use it when we're marking up to cut suits. So there we are. I will do one more video in this series when it's complete, because although I'm running the risk of teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, teaching a former W01 of the British Army, of a Highland regiment, how to put on and maintain his Highland kit, I am going to tell him exactly what I tell every other customer about what to do and what not to do and such like that, and also explain the rationale for my measuring system, why my kilts are shorter than Army kilts in the past, which he's used to. But that will be the subject for another video. So thank you. Carry on.